My name is Liam, I'm 32 years old, and for most of my life, I was the family's reliable, invisible son. The one they called when they needed something fixed, but never when they wanted to celebrate something. That role was reserved for my brother. I built my life quietly, in the shadows of their expectations, thinking that was just my lot. But that all changed in the sterile, quiet hum of the neonatal intensive care unit. It changed the moment I walked into my daughter's room and saw my mother unplugging the vital signs monitor that tracked my premature baby's every breath, just so my brother could charge his phone. The look on their faces wasn't guilt or panic, it was annoyance at being interrupted. In that single, heart-stopping instant, 30 years of being the second-choice son came to a boiling point. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives, because they had no idea who I had become while they weren't looking. They thought I was just a simple contractor. They were about to find out how wrong they were, and I was going to make sure the lesson was one they could never, ever forget. Before I continue with this story, I want you to do something for me. If you've ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or taken for granted by the very people who were supposed to build you up, drop a comment below and tell me I'm not alone. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you know what it's like to have to fight for your own worth. Your support means more than you know. To understand the weight of that moment in the hospital, you have to understand the 30 years that led up to it. My childhood was a masterclass in comparative studies, and I was always the control group. My older brother, Kyle, was the experiment, the one they poured everything into. He was the golden child, charismatic and bright, the one destined for greatness. I was Liam. Practical, quiet, good with my hands. While Kyle was getting signed up for debate club, advanced placement classes, and summer camps for future leaders, I was figuring out how to patch drywall in my bedroom and fix the leaky faucet my dad kept complaining about but never touched. Our family photo albums tell the whole story. Pages and pages of Kyle holding trophies, Kyle shaking hands with the principal, Kyle beaming in a cap and gown from a prestigious university. My appearances were sparse, usually in the background of one of his shots, slightly out of focus. My achievements were met with a distracted nod. When I won the regional science fair in 8th grade with a detailed model of a suspension bridge, my father glanced at the blue ribbon and said, "That's nice, son. Did you hear Kyle made the dean's list again?" It wasn't malicious, not in a way you could point to and call abuse. It was a kind of ambient neglect, a quiet, constant message that my value was secondary. My purpose was to be stable, to cause no trouble, so all their energy and resources could be focused on Kyle's launch into the stratosphere. When it came time for college, they took out a second mortgage to pay for Kyle's business degree at an out-of-state school. There was never any question about it. For me, the conversation was much shorter. "You're good with your hands, Liam," my father said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Trade school is a solid option. You can live at home, save some money." There was no discussion of what I wanted, no exploration of my potential. My path was chosen for me based on their convenience. So I went. I enrolled in a construction management program at the local community college. I didn't complain. I worked nights and weekends as a laborer for a local building company to pay my tuition, so I wouldn't have to ask them for a dime. I'd come home, covered in dust and paint, my muscles aching, and see Kyle on a video call from his dorm room, complaining about the cafeteria food or needing another few $100s for books, and my parents would listen with rapt attention, their wallets already open. I wasn't jealous of the money, I was starved for the attention. I just wanted them to look at me with half the pride they had for him. But that look never came. Instead, I became the family handyman, the built-in support system. "Liam, the garbage disposal is making a funny noise. Liam, can you come help your mother move the furniture? Liam, Kyle's car broke down again, can you give him a ride?" I always said yes. I thought that by being useful, by being reliable, I could earn the affection they gave him so freely. It was a fool's errand. The more I did, the more they expected. My utility became my identity in their eyes. I wasn't a son, I was a resource. And the more I fixed for them, the more broken I felt. While my family saw me as the dependable son working a simple trade, I was quietly building an empire they couldn't conceive of. My journey started with my first boss, a man named Mr. Henderson. He was a grizzled, third-generation contractor with hands like leather and an eye for detail that bordered on obsessive. He owned the company I worked for during community college. Unlike my father, Mr. Henderson saw something in me. He didn't just see a strong back, he saw a mind that understood structure, that could visualize a finished project from a blueprint, and that had an unteachable work ethic. "You don't just see the wall, Liam," he told me one day, after I'd stayed late on my own time to reframe a window that wasn't perfectly square. "You see the whole house." Most guys never get that he became the father figure I never really had. He taught me how to bid jobs, manage subcontractors, handle demanding clients, and most importantly, how to value my own work. When I graduated from my program, he sat me down in his cluttered office. "You could be a foreman here for the rest of your life and make a good living," he said, leaning back in his creaky chair. "Or, you could take what I've taught you and build something for yourself. The choice is yours, but I know what I'd do if I were you." He gave me a small, interest-free loan to buy my first truck and a set of professional-grade tools. It was more faith than my own father had ever shown me. So, at 23, I started my own company, Stone Ridge Builders. I lived in a tiny, cheap apartment, drove that used truck, and poured every single penny I made back into the business. For the first 2 years, I was the entire company. I was the designer, the framer, the bookkeeper, and the janitor. I took the small, difficult jobs no one else wanted, cramped bathroom remodels, tricky deck repairs, basement finishing projects. I was meticulous. My work was flawless. Word of mouth started to spread. My name became synonymous with quality and reliability. While Kyle was burning through our parents' money on a series of failed startups, a gourmet dog food delivery service, a line of artisanal phone cases, I was slowly, quietly building a reputation. I kept my success completely hidden from my family. When they asked about work, I'd just say, "It's going okay, keeping busy." They pictured me patching drywall for $100. They had no idea I was now taking on full kitchen renovations for $50,000. The turning point came when I met Sarah. She was an architect I was working with on a historic home restoration. She was brilliant, kind, and she saw me for exactly who I was. She wasn't impressed by money, she was impressed by passion and skill. She was the first person to point out how deeply unhealthy my family dynamic was. "They don't see you, Liam," she said one night. "They see a safety net for your brother." She was right. With her encouragement, I started to value myself outside of their approval. My business exploded. I started hiring employees. I specialized in high-end, custom home builds. By the time I was 30, Stone Ridge Builders was one of the most sought-after construction firms in the state. I was a multimillionaire, but you wouldn't know it. Sarah and I lived in a modest, comfortable house, one I'd renovated myself, of course. We drove normal cars. We didn't broadcast our wealth. It was our secret, our peace. My family continued to treat me like the poor relation, the simple handyman. And I let them. I let them believe it because a part of me knew, deep down, that a day of reckoning was coming. I just never imagined it would come in a hospital, with my daughter's life hanging in the balance. The call from the hospital came at 2 a.m. Sarah had gone into labor 6 weeks early. The next few hours were a blur of fear and adrenaline. Our daughter, Lily, was born weighing just 4 pounds. She was perfect, but she was tiny and her lungs weren't fully developed. They whisked her away to the NICU. Seeing her in that incubator, a fragile little bird hooked up to a web of wires and tubes, shattered me. All the money, all the success, it meant nothing. All I wanted was for her to be okay. For the first week, Sarah and I lived at the hospital. We slept in shifts in the uncomfortable chairs in Lily's room, our world shrinking to the rhythmic beeping of her monitors. The nurses were angels, patiently explaining what every machine did. One was a specialized biller blanket for her jaundice. Another was the vital signs monitor, tracking her heart rate and oxygen saturation. Its steady pulse was the soundtrack to our life. My family's reaction was, in hindsight, predictable. My mother called, her voice laced with a theatrical panic that seemed more for her own benefit than ours. "Oh, my poor grandbaby. And poor Sarah. Is there anything we can do?" Kyle sent a text, "Heard the news. Bummer. Let me know when you're having a proper welcome party." I ignored him. A few days in, my mother called again. "We're coming to the hospital," she announced. "We need to see our granddaughter. And Kyle is coming too. He's taking a break from a very important business meeting to show his support." I tried to put them off, explaining how strict the NICU rules were, how fragile Lily was. But she wouldn't hear it. "Don't be silly, Liam. We're family. We'll be there this afternoon." When they arrived, the tension was immediate. They walked into Lily's tiny, sanitized room like they were walking into a showroom. My father stood awkwardly by the door, looking uncomfortable. Kyle immediately pulled out his phone, scrolling through it. My mother, however, swooped in, peering into the incubator with a critical eye. "She's so small," she whispered, as if it were an accusation. She started offering unsolicited advice, questioning the nurse's procedures, making the whole atmosphere incredibly stressful. Sarah, exhausted and hormonal, politely but firmly asked for some quiet. The entitlement ramped up after that. Kyle started complaining. "Is there anywhere to get a decent coffee around here? This hospital coffee is sludge." Then, the final straw. "My phone's about to die," he announced loudly. "Where's an outlet?" The NICU rooms were designed for medical equipment, with outlets clustered near the baby's incubator. There was one free one across the room, but Kyle deemed it too far. I was in the corner, speaking quietly with a doctor, when I heard Sarah's sharp gasp. I turned. My mother was standing by the incubator. She had unplugged the cord to Lily's vital signs monitor and the Billy blanket, which were plugged into a power strip. In her hand was Kyle's phone charger, which she was plugging into the newly freed-up socket. The monitor screen went black. A piercing, high-pitched alarm began to shriek through the room. My mother and brother just looked at the screaming machine with annoyance. "It'll just be for a second," my mother said defensively, as a nurse rushed in. His phone was at 1%. He has important investors to talk to. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it vaporized. The quiet, reliable, invisible Liam ceased to exist. They hadn't just unplugged a machine. They had shown me, in the clearest terms possible, that my daughter's life was less important than my brother's convenience. The escalation was over. The war was about to begin. The world went silent, except for the shrill wail of the alarm. The nurse, a woman named Linda who had been so kind to us, shoved my mother's hand away from the outlet and slammed the monitor's plug back into the wall. The screen flickered to life, and the beeping of Lily's heart rate returned, a steady rhythm that felt like my own. I saw the relief on Linda's face, but it was immediately replaced by a cold fury as she turned to my family. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice low and dangerous. My mother actually had the audacity to look indignant. My son needed to charge his phone. It was an emergency. Kyle, oblivious as ever, just shrugged. "It was only off for like 10 seconds. What's the big deal?" The big deal. My vision narrowed. All I could see was my tiny daughter, fighting for every breath, and these two people who saw her life support as an inconvenience. Sarah was already by the incubator, her hand resting protectively on the plastic, tears streaming down her face. That's when I moved. I walked across the small room and stood directly in front of my brother. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "Get out," I said. It was a command, not a request. He looked at me, genuinely confused. "What's your problem, man?" My father finally spoke up from the doorway. "Liam, calm down." It was a simple mistake. I turned my head slowly to look at him. "A mistake? You think this was a mistake?" I pointed a trembling finger toward the incubator. "That is my daughter. She is fighting for her life. And you stood there and watched them unplug her monitor so I jabbed my finger toward Kyle, could charge his phone to talk about some fake business deal that you probably paid for. The color drained from my father's face. My mother started in with her usual tactic. Liam, don't you talk to your father that way. We came here to support you. That's when I laughed. It was a hollow, bitter sound. Support? You don't know the first thing about support. I looked back at Kyle. You have 60 seconds to get out of this hospital before I have security remove you, he scoffed, but he saw something in my eyes he'd never seen before. He started backing away. My mother grabbed his arm. We're leaving, she hissed, glaring at me. I have never been so disrespected in my entire life. They were halfway out the door when my father paused. He was trying to find the right words to re-establish his authority. This was the moment I had been unconsciously waiting for my entire life. Dad, I said, my voice dangerously calm. This Friday, I want you, Mom, and Kyle to come to a meeting at the offices of Northwood Capital Ventures at noon. Don't be late. He looked confused. Why? Because, I said, letting the words hang in the air, we're going to have a long overdue conversation about my brother's finances. And mine. I saw a flicker of greed in his eyes, quickly masked. He thought I was finally coming to him for help, that I was going to ask for a loan. He thought he had his leverage back. He nodded curtly. We'll be there. They left. The room was finally quiet again. Sarah came over and wrapped her arms around me, and I just held her, shaking with a rage so profound it felt like it could power a city. They thought they were walking into a meeting where they held all the cards. They thought they were going to put the handyman's son back in his place. They had no idea they were walking into their own judgment day. The climax of my life was set for Friday at noon, and I was going to be the one running the show. The next 2 days were a blur of adrenaline and planning. While Sarah stayed with Lily, I met with my lawyer and my accountant. I gathered every document, every financial statement, every contract that told the story of Stone Ridge Builders. It felt like preparing for the most important business negotiation of my life, but the stakes weren't monetary, they were about reclaiming my soul. When Friday arrived, I was dressed in a custom-tailored suit that had cost more than the car my parents drove. I was no longer Liam the handyman. I was Liam Sterling, President and CEO. I arrived at the sleek, glass and steel skyscraper that housed Northwood Capital Ventures, the private equity firm that had become a major investor in my company 2 years prior. I had arranged to use their main boardroom. When my family arrived, they were visibly intimidated. They walked into the lobby, looking out of place in their casual clothes. My father wore a strained expression of authority, Kyle looked bored and impatient, and my mother was radiating passive aggression. The receptionist, under my instructions, greeted them. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling? Kyle Sterling? Mr. Sterling is waiting for you in the main conference room. 34th floor. The use of Mr. Sterling for me, and not my father, was the first small crack in their reality. They were silent in the elevator. When the doors opened on the 34th floor, they stepped out into a space of quiet, immense wealth. The conference room had a 20-foot mahogany table and a panoramic view of the city skyline. I was standing at the head of the table, flanked by my lawyer, David, and my accountant, Mark, who also happened to be my best friend. He'd seen their behavior for years. Sarah was there too, sitting to my right, her presence a silent, solid wall of support. My family stopped dead in the doorway, their mouths slightly agape. My father was the first to recover. Liam, what is all this? He blustered, gesturing around the room. Is this some kind of joke? No joke, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the vast room. Please, have a seat. They sat down hesitantly on the other side of the massive table, looking like school children in the principal's office. I let the silence stretch, letting them take in the scene. I watched the confusion on their faces curdle into unease. Finally, I began. I asked you here today to discuss a financial matter, I started, my tone all business. Specifically, the ongoing financial drain that is Kyle's career. Kyle bristled. Hey! My ventures are solid. My father jumped in. Son, if you need some help, you should have just asked. You didn't need to put on this show. I held up a hand, and he fell silent, shocked by the gesture's authority. I don't need help, Dad. In fact, I'm the one who has been asked for help. I slid a folder across the polished table. My Aunt Carol called me yesterday. She said you and Mom were planning to ask her to co-sign another loan for Kyle's latest business, this time for $200,000. My mother flushed. Carol shouldn't be spreading family business. This isn't family business anymore, I said sharply. This is a pattern of destructive behavior that you have enabled for his entire life. And after what you did in that hospital, it's over. I nodded to my accountant, Mark. Mark, if you would. Mark tapped a button, and the large screen on the wall lit up. The first slide was the logo for Stone Ridge Builders. As you know, I said, I own a small contracting business. I paused. Or at least, that's what I've allowed you to believe. Mark clicked to the next slide. It was a profit and loss statement. The net profit for the previous fiscal year was listed in stark black and white, $42 million. My mother gasped. My father stared, his eyes wide, his jaw slack. Kyle just looked stunned. For the last 10 years, I continued, my voice gaining strength, while you were funding failure after failure, I was building this. While you were telling me a trade school was my only option, I was building a company that is now one of the leading luxury home builders in the state. Northwood Capital, our hosts today, invested $8 million last year for a 20% stake. I let that sink in. The shock in the room was a physical force. You see, I said, leaning forward, you thought I was the safety net. The truth is, I could have bought and sold Kyle's ridiculous business ideas 100 times over without even noticing the expense. But I never would. Because unlike you, I don't reward incompetence and entitlement. I stood up and walked around the table until I was standing behind them, forcing them to crane their necks to look at me. It was a power move I learned from Mr. Henderson, and it worked. They looked small and trapped. Let's be very clear about what happens now, I said, my voice cold and hard as the glass tower we were in. The bank of Mom and Dad is closed. Your funding is over. Not because I'm telling you to stop, but because I know for a fact you've leveraged everything you own to keep his fantasy alive. You're nearly broke, and you were about to drag Aunt Carol down with you. My father started to protest. Now, you don't know, I cut him off. I know you refinanced the house 2 years ago for his chap development company. I know you emptied your retirement accounts for the Artisan Water brand. My accountant is better than yours. It's over then. I turned my attention to the most important point. But the money is nothing. The money is just paper. What you did to my daughter. That is unforgivable. I leaned down, my face close to my mother's. You valued a phone call over your granddaughter's heartbeat. You stood in that room, a place of healing and miracles, and you brought your petty, selfish toxicity with you. So here are my terms. I stood up straight again, my voice ringing with finality. 1. You will never receive a single dollar from me. Not for a loan, not for a gift, not for your retirement. Nothing. You made your investment in him. I gestured to Kyle. Now you can live with the returns. Kyle looked like he'd been slapped. 2. Access to my daughter, Lily, will be on my terms and my terms alone. It will be limited. It will be supervised. And it will only happen when I am certain that your presence is a benefit to her, not a threat. One more stunt, one more act of disrespect to me or to Sarah, and that access is gone forever. Am I clear? There was a stunned silence. My mother was openly crying now, not tears of remorse, but tears of frustrated rage. My father was pale, his bravado completely gone, replaced by a look of utter defeat. Kyle was just staring at the financial statement on the screen, his mind unable to process the scale of what he was seeing. I walked to the door and held it open. The meeting is over. You can see yourselves out. They didn't move for a long moment, frozen in their disbelief. Then, slowly, my father stood up, his legs unsteady. He didn't look at me as he walked past. My mother followed, pulling a whimpering Kyle along with her. As they passed, my mother shot me a look of pure hatred. You'll regret this, Liam, she whispered. You'll be all alone. I just looked at Sarah, who gave me a small, proud smile. No, I said, loud enough for them to hear as they walked down the hall. I won't. I closed the door on their retreating backs, and for the first time in my life, I felt the profound, earth-shattering relief of freedom. The standoff was over. I had won. The days and weeks following that meeting were a masterclass in emotional warfare. My family, realizing their direct authority over me was gone, shifted their strategy to manipulation. The first wave came from my mother. She began a campaign of guilt-laced voicemails. Liam, I can't sleep. All I can think about is how you've torn this family apart. Your father is so stressed, his health is suffering. Is this what you wanted? We always did our best for you boys. I don't know where all this anger is coming from. To be cast aside like this, after all we've done, it's a cruelty I never thought my own son was capable of. Each message was designed to chip away at my resolve, to make me feel like the villain. Kyle tried a different angle. He started texting me, alternating between feigned remorse and outright demands. Hey bro, look, I'm sorry about the hospital thing. I wasn't thinking. But you can't just cut us off. Dad said you're loaded. I just need $50K to get this new project off the ground. It's a sure thing this time. You'd make it back in 6 months. When I didn't reply, the tone changed. Wow. So this is who you are now? Some rich jerk who looks down on his own family? You haven't changed at all. Always so selfish. It was classic gaslighting, an attempt to rewrite history and paint me as the bad guy. The pressure was immense, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't affect me. Years of conditioning to be the good son ran deep. Doubts crept in late at night. Was I being too harsh? Was I destroying my family? This is where my chosen family became my anchor. Sarah was my rock. Every time I wavered, she was there to remind me of the reality. Liam, listen to what they're saying, she'd tell me gently, holding my hand. There's no apology. No accountability. It's all about what they want from you. Remember how you felt in that hospital room? That was real. This is just noise. My best friend, Mark, who had been my accountant at the meeting, was more blunt. Dude, they're toxic. They're like emotional vampires. You finally put up a cross and some garlic, and now they're hissing outside the window. Don't you dare let them back in. They celebrated my strength. They validated my anger. They reminded me that setting a boundary isn't an act of aggression, it's an act of self-preservation. The real test came when my father called. His approach was one of wounded pride and paternal disappointment. I don't even know who you are anymore, Liam. A man's duty is to his family. You've forgotten that. All this money has made you hard. Your mother is a wreck. You need to fix this. It was the same old script. I was the fixer. It was my job to manage their emotions, to restore their comfort at my own expense. But something had fundamentally changed in me. No, Dad, I said, my voice steady. My duty is to my wife and my daughter. My duty is to protect them, and right now, that means protecting them from you. You don't get to hurt my child and then demand I make you feel better about it. The conversation is over. I hung up the phone. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the most liberating. The fallout was messy and painful, but I wasn't facing it alone. With Sarah, Mark, and my beautiful daughter Lily, who was growing stronger every day, I was building a new definition of family, one based not on obligation or transaction, but on genuine love, mutual respect, and unwavering support. The consequences of my family's actions, and my refusal to shield them anymore, arrived sooner than I expected. Without my invisible safety net and their access to my phantom future bailouts, their house of cards collapsed. The first domino was Kyle. His sure-thing business, for which my parents were desperately trying to secure funding, was exposed as a complete sham. One of his previous disgruntled investors, another family friend they had roped in, sued him for fraud. The legal fees alone were crippling. My parents, having co-signed everything and bled their finances dry, were left holding the bag. A few months after our meeting, I received a call from my Aunt Carol. Her tone was somber. "Liam, I thought you should know. Your parents are in foreclosure. The bank is taking the house." A part of me, the old Liam, felt a pang of guilt. That was my childhood home. But then I remembered Lily's monitor going dark, and the feeling was replaced by a grim sense of justice. They had made their choices. They had invested everything in a failing asset, and now the market had corrected itself. Sarah and I focused on our own life. Lily finally came home from the NICU, a momentous day that felt like the true beginning of our family. Our house, once just a place we lived, became a home filled with the sounds of a happy, healthy baby. I poured my energy into my work, not just for the money, but for the love of creation, of building something lasting and real. I also began the quiet work of healing. I started seeing a therapist, something I never would have considered before. Unpacking 30 years of emotional neglect was painful, but necessary. I learned to identify the patterns of behavior, to understand the roles I had been forced into, and to forgive myself for taking so long to stand up. The news from my aunt kept trickling in. My parents lost the house and were forced to move into a small, run-down rental apartment on the other side of town. My father, whose pride was his most cherished possession, had to take a job as a greeter at a big box store to make ends meet. Kyle, facing a judgment he couldn't pay, declared bankruptcy. He ended up moving back in with my parents, the three of them crammed into a two-bedroom apartment, a situation that I'm sure was rife with blame and resentment. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel pleasure in their downfall. Instead, I felt a profound sadness for the family I could have had, the relationships that had been squandered on ego and favoritism. One afternoon, while I was playing with Lily on the living room floor, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello?" There was a long pause, and then a shaky, unfamiliar voice. "Liam?" "It's your mother." I was about to hang up, but she spoke quickly. "Please, don't hang up. Please." I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry." The word sounded foreign coming from her lips. It was the beginning of a long, slow, and complicated process, but it was a beginning nonetheless. Their consequences had finally led them to a place of humility, and for the first time, a door to a different kind of future, one built on a foundation of truth, had cracked open. The "I'm sorry" was just the start. It was a single, cracked brick laid on barren ground. Over the next few months, my mother began to reach out more. At first, the calls were awkward and stilted. She would talk about the weather, her new job as a cashier, the struggles of living in the apartment. There were still undertones of her old self, moments of passive-aggressive martyrdom, but something was different. The hard shell of her pride had been shattered by the force of their new reality. The real breakthrough came about 6 months after the foreclosure. She called and asked if I would meet her for a coffee, just the two of us. I was hesitant, but Sarah encouraged me. "You don't have to forgive her," she said. "But maybe you need to hear her out. For your own peace." We met at a neutral, public coffee shop. She looked older, tired. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple, worn coat. For the first time, she didn't lead with complaints or demands. She just looked at her cup and said, "I was wrong, Liam. For your whole life, I was wrong." She confessed that seeing Kyle fail so spectacularly, after they had sacrificed everything, had been like a splash of ice water. "We put him on a pedestal," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "And in doing that, we made you invisible. We saw you as the strong one, the one who didn't need us. We took your strength for granted, and we used it as an excuse to ignore you. There is no excuse for what I did at the hospital. I was so wrapped up in Kyle's drama, I lost my mind. I am so sorry." It was the first genuine apology I had ever received from her. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase 30 years of hurt, but it was real. I didn't offer a bailout. I didn't promise to fix everything. But I did offer a new kind of relationship. I told her that if she and Dad were willing to go to family counseling, both with me and on their own, I would be willing to slowly, cautiously, let them back into my life. Not my finances, but my life. My father was resistant. His pride was a fortress. But faced with the prospect of never truly knowing his granddaughter, and with my mother's persistent urging, he eventually, grudgingly, agreed. The therapy sessions were brutal. There were arguments, tears, and long, painful silences. My father struggled to admit his role, often falling back on blaming Kyle's bad choices, but over time, with the therapist's guidance, he started to listen. He started to see the part he played in creating the dynamic. Kyle was a different story. He refused to participate. He saw the entire situation as my fault, a betrayal of the highest order. He remains estranged, living in their spare room, hopping from one gig economy job to the next, a permanent monument to wasted potential. The reconciliation with my parents is tentative, imperfect. We see them once a month, for a supervised visit with Lily in a public park. The conversations are still sometimes strained. But when my father holds Lily's hand now, there's a look of quiet awe in his eyes that was never there before. When my mother watches me play with my daughter, she doesn't offer advice, she just smiles, a sad, knowing smile. It's not a fairy tale ending, but it's a real one. It's a relationship being rebuilt not on fantasy and favoritism, but on the hard, painful ground of truth and clear, unbreakable boundaries. Looking back on this entire journey, from the quiet hum of the NICU to the tense quiet of a therapist's office, the most important lesson I learned was about the nature of value. For so long, I sought my value in my parents' eyes. I thought if I was useful enough, responsible enough, successful enough, they would finally see me. I was wrong. My worth was never something they could bestow upon me, it had to be something I claimed for myself. The moment I stopped needing their approval was the moment I truly became powerful. The confrontation in that boardroom wasn't about the money. The money was just a tool, a language they could finally understand. It was about showing them the man they had refused to see, and in doing so, finally seeing him clearly myself. Family, I've learned, is not just about blood. Blood can be an obligation, a chain, a reason for toxicity to persist under the guise of love. True family is about respect. It's about who shows up, who supports you, who validates your truth even when it's hard. My family is Sarah, who stood by me and gave me the courage to fight. It's my daughter Lily, whose fragile strength taught me what's truly worth protecting. It's my friend Mark, who had my back without question. It's even my mentor, Mr. Henderson, who saw potential in a quiet kid and invested in him when no one else would. These are the people who form the foundation of my life. The relationship with my parents is an addition. A renovation on a damaged structure. It might never be perfect, but it's being built on a new, more honest blueprint. My hope is that my story can serve as a reminder to anyone who feels invisible in their own life, your value is inherent. It is not determined by the people who overlook you. You have the right to set boundaries, to demand respect, and to walk away from any table where love is not being served. Build your own life. Find your own tribe. Become the person they never thought you could be, not for them, but for you. And if this story resonated with you, if you found a piece of your own struggle in mine, please hit that subscribe button and share this video. You are not alone in this fight. Thank you for listening.